Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this installment of the Esri Emergency Management webinar series, where we're going to be talking about ArcGIS Solutions for Resilience. My name is Ryan Landcloss. I'm the Director of Public Safety Industries here at Esri, and joining me today is Jessica Nooner, who's the ArcGIS for Emergency Management Solutions engineer on the team. And we'll be talking about three simple things today. One is just developing an understanding of what resilience means, how it can be applied locally in the community level, and also then showing you some of the solutions that we have to get you started on your journey of resilience, both mapping and understanding, analyzing resilience in the community. We'll also do a question and answer period, so we'll save some time at the end. So if you do have questions, know that everybody has been muted today on the line. So if you would utilize the chat window that you've got here on the GoToWebinar, you can ask questions of us throughout the event. We'll try to answer as many as we can today as we go through. If we don't get to your question, know that we will follow up after today's webinar. There will be a series of interactive poll questions as well, so that's a chance for us just to kind of get a bit of guidance from you as we go throughout the webinar today to tailor the message a bit more. We'll ask you a couple of those questions, and when those pop up, you'll have the chance to just interact directly on the screen and give us some of your feedback, again, to help us tailor the next section as we kind of work our way through and to get the message dialed in based on where you are today in your journey of resilience. Once we're finished, this recording will be posted online after the webinar, and you'll receive an email with links that'll point you in the direction of some of the solutions that we'll show today, as well as where you can find additional webinar recordings around a host of topics for emergency management, as well as law enforcement and other public safety issues if you have interest at your community level. So with that, let's kind of set the stage a bit of resilience. So, it's funny, when we started prepping for this webinar internally, it's a good time for us to just kind of pause for a second and then to really make sure that we're centered around what we mean by the term resilience. And I think that's a common place for people to start the conversation. I think resilience means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and it really is specific to your geography, right? Resilience can mean a number of different things, but at its base, it's really about the ability, right? The capacity of your organization, of your city, of your state to recover quickly from any number of difficulties. And really at its core, it's about a toughness, right? And that could be individual resilience about a personal level for those that are affected by events or disasters, right? It could be the organization or our business system's ability to recover quickly and be stable so that we do have this kind of toughness built across the system itself. So at its core, that's what we're really talking about, is how we can help you start to understand how to determine where those difficulties might arise, how to build that resilience and toughness into your systems, into your community, to allow you to bounce back more quickly when something does happen. And as we continue that kind of conversation internally about kind of centering ourselves around resilience, it was a good time for me personally just kind of reflect back on a couple of things. And for those of you who have been around Esri for a while and have attended our users conference in San Diego every July, our owner, Jack Dangerman, always has a slide here that he kind of starts at the beginning. It's, talking about how our world is increasingly challenged by a number of things, everything from, shifts in demographics, the urbanization of our communities and our world. Is the pollution, right? It's climate change. It's, social conflict that's on the rise. And he always challenges us collectively as a body, right? So those of us working in geography and GIS, that we can use this technology to develop an understanding of these challenges. We can work together to kind of start to drive understanding across communities, across organizations, that really can then put us in play to drive action, right? To drive change. And so as I thought about this for a bit, these global indicators, right? These global challenges that we face around climate change and the like are sometimes difficult to translate down to the local level, right? I think we all understand them. We see them in the news. We read about these across the world. And so today what I want to kind of do is say that let's take a level down. Let's look at what that means for us at a community level. And I would say that just as that our world is challenged, I would say that our communities are increasingly challenged by a number of factors. Now, on the screen here, I've got something we kind of classify as these acute shocks, right? These are the rapid and the sudden onset issues that affect our communities. Things like an earthquake, right? A wildfire, it could be a flood event that's coming in, or a hurricane that's coming across, right? They are moments in time that affect us, right? That change what we do on a daily basis and put us into a response mode. Now, I think the challenge here for public safety is that we typically always focus here, right? It's these acute things that we're working to understand where the vulnerabilities lie and understanding how we prepare ourselves and our communities to address these acute shocks. And we immediately put ourselves in kind of a response mantra. And I would say that that kind of shortchanges, right? We all know that in public safety, it's about being prepared, right? To understand these, acute shocks and what their potential means for our people and our places. And I would say that that mindset, right? That life cycle of understanding preparedness that then can set us up for good response and quicker recovery is really what resilience is. Now, there's more than just these acute shocks, right? So at our community level, we're not just looking at the earthquake potential, right? The hazards that exist nearby. We're also looking at these longer term, these slow moving issues that are evolving around us in our communities. Things like crime and violence, right? A changing tax base as we move demographic. We have shifts in economic inequality in the communities. We've got aging infrastructure around us. And really understanding how those chronic stresses can exacerbate the problems from an acute shock tremendously is really key. So when the earthquake or the flood happens, it's not just the impact of that specific event, it's the cascading impacts of things. It's how those chronic stresses exacerbate the problem inside of our community that we really want to start to understand to truly build resilience to any of these shocks or stresses. And so that's our message today. We're going to start taking a holistic look at how we can look at a community level around these challenges that we're all facing, that we're hearing about, how we can start to put together an understanding and a value around managing the acute shocks and the risks that we face there along with those stresses. And finally, the piece that we really want to drive home is that once we understand how those shocks and stresses come into play, we really want to see where our people, right, the citizens in our community, in our state, and where the critical assets, right, the facilities that we maintain and deliver service into the community are potentially impacted as well, so that we can truly get a picture of where we need to put mitigation strategies in play, where we need to place resilience programs, right, and start communicating that outward into the community. And so if we think about that, the concept of these acute shocks, right, these chronic stresses and how they affect the people and the assets that we have in the community, I really like this definition from the Rockefeller Foundation that really articulates that, which is more than just that simple definition where I started. It's that resilience is the capacity of individuals, right, the citizens in our community. It's the community itself. It's the institutions around there, the businesses and our systems within a city to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of those chronic stresses are in play and the acute shocks that they experience when they happen. And I really like that. I think it's a great place for us to maybe center this conversation today to set context of what we mean by resilience. And what we're going to talk about today is how you can use some of these solutions to really begin that journey along the path. So let me stop for a second. I want to take our first poll question, and it really is kind of dovetailing off of that Rockefeller Foundation. So part of the Rockefeller Foundation 100 Resilient Cities initiatives is putting in place chief resilience officers at a community level. And so I'm curious just to know from those that are on the phone today, does your organization currently have a chief resilience officer, or is there somebody designated to serve in this role? And that may be somebody in the mayor's office, right, at the county executive level, on the commissioner's level that may be in play. And so if you could take a moment, just give us a bit of feedback as to what you currently have in place, either at the organization, the community level, and the like, and just select yes or no to give us a quick indication of how you've started to address and who you would go to internally to talk about resilience. So I'll give you just a moment to reply there for us. All right, let's take a look at the results. All right, so quite a bit. So it looks like about 70 some odd % are at no, and there's a few of those yes. And I would just say that, as you leave today, there are going to be opportunities to have a discussion with folks internally. For those of you that have a designated person, perhaps they're with you today in the room, they're watching this webinar, perhaps you started a conversation, and I just want to kind of arm you with some additional conversation points of the value that GIS can play to do that. And for those of you that do not currently have a chief resilience officer in play, I also want to give you some talking points, right? So that as you start to hear the evolution of your organization, of your community in this resilience mantra, and they maybe identify a leader inside of the community to take on that challenge, that you also have a toolkit that you can point to and support. All right, so let's close the results down and we'll continue on in the presentation here. Okay, so let's think a bit about why you're here, why we are here at Esri, more than just this passion to, understand this conflict and this change that's ongoing around us. It really is that, here at Esri, we believe in the value of GIS to help you both design and plan and eventually take action on resilience measures, right? At a community level, we're going to talk about that. It's really how we think this life cycle, this science of where that we talk about all the time, which is the science of geography and the technology of GIS together, gives you a framework. It allows you to take things from the economic perspective, right? The community level, look at that infrastructure that's aging, your transportation and mobility issues locally in a community as those demographics begin to shift, as well as the natural hazards that you're exposed to truly put those together, to analyze them, to design and plan scenarios around that might help you increase resilience. Evaluate what the impact of those plans are around the assets and the people. Are we really making a difference in the right areas? Do we understand how all those indicators together drive change and eventually take action? And once we take action, how do we monitor that action? How do we make sure that our plans are being followed that we have in place? And do we need to modify those plans based on changing economic or infrastructure indicators internally? And then the final step would be, of course, how do we communicate that outwardly? How do we engage at a community level so that it's not just the government taking action, but it's the citizens that are taking action, the community-based groups taking action, and engaging in a two-way conversation between citizens and the systems and the organizations that really implement those resilience measures to truly drive change. And I would say that's the value that I want you to have, and I want that to be in your back pocket. So when you have that conversation, this is the story I want you to be able to articulate, is that GIS and the power of mapping is not just basic mapping, right? It's the analysis, it's the planning, it's the iteration, and eventually the communication and engagement level. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how you can begin to understand and build resilience. We've got a couple of steps that we think can help you in this process. And those at a very high level are that you're going to start to learn how to assess and analyze the risk, right? Those chronic stresses, the acute shocks, where they exist, and evaluate the potential impacts against your critical facilities, right? The assets in your community and the people that you have distributed out throughout your community. You'll talk about how we can plan resilience activities around that understanding, right? Are we putting activities in place that really can help us build resilience to those data-driven activities above? We're going to talk about how you can monitor the status of your efforts. So we're going to look at tools that allow you to really engage with the community, to have a two-way conversation and monitor that impact. And then you can iterate back through the planning and always keep this cycle burning, right? This is not a one and done. This is always looking at new data coming in, analyzing the impacts of our activities, and continuing this cycle to address the changes that you're going to see. Now, that may sound daunting at first, but that's why we're here today, right? So Jess is with us today to talk a bit about our solutions. And so for those of you that have used our solutions before, our ArcGIS Solutions are industry-focused apps and capabilities that help you get started on a journey. In this case, we have a series of solutions that allow you to start to do the 5 things that we just talked about, and they are part of our emergency management solution offering. And with us today is Jess Nooner. I'm going to let Jess kind of take over. She's going to show us a bit about the solutions themselves, continue at another level down on a technology level. We'll do a bit of a demonstration to show you how these solutions can be put into practice. And then we'll take your questions as we go through and end up with some next steps that you can follow on your journey as you begin, again, to communicate and engage at the executive level. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jess. All yours. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Ryan. So I've started sharing my screen. Everything good on your end?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jess.
All right. Yeah, so just as Ryan mentioned, I have a quick introduction to what solutions are to sort of set some context for the work that we want to show you today. The ArcGIS for Emergency Management Solution is a collection of maps and applications that are focused on all the phases of emergency response. And the configuration, these are configurations of the ArcGIS platform, and they're focused on those essential workflows for response, recovery, and what we're looking at today, specifically resilience. All the work that we do is freely available when you're an Esri customer, and it's fully supported. So what that means is if you see something today that you'd like to implement for your organization, you can call technical support if you run into any issues getting going with it. The other thing that means is that as the Esri platform evolves, we do all the work to ensure that the solutions will work on the latest versions of ArcGIS. So you won't get version locked due to implementing one. We also take great care in ensuring that they're extensible and configurable. So if you need to make a small tweak, that's usually really easy to do. And the last thing that I'll mention is that all of the work that we do in our team is done in partnership with our customers. It's really important that we understand your needs and work with you on the development of each configuration within the collection. Our goal is then to help the whole community be successful. So we really appreciate being able to work with you on what we deliver. So here's a look at the complete emergency management solution. This was like a timestamp at the end of last year. And this is really a living portfolio of apps that we actively maintain and work to grow. So in today's presentation, I'll be focusing on the work we've done over the past year or so to grow the collection of solutions in this resilience category. Okay, so let's dig in. We wanted to share a little bit about our references for this work. The Esri team has been referencing both industry and government guidance as the foundation for the resilience solutions. We've taken into consideration guidance from both domestic, specifically FEMA, and international through DFID, the Department for International Defense Organizations, to ensure that the solutions would transcend geography and be able to be applicable to any community that you might want to apply them to around the globe. Recently, we've been working with the city of Boulder in Colorado, and they suggested that we also begin to leverage guidance provided by NIST. So we've begun to fold in their methodologies specifically around community engagement. All right, the other tenet of this work is that the scale of the analysis that may be performed we understand that scale is variable, and so we want the work to be able to be applied from a national down to a local level. And so we've been evaluating what the various levels of government may be doing if any variances need to exist. So for example, if we use NOAA as an example, they've developed a climate resilience toolkit, which contains a series of high-level steps to evaluate and plan for that global stress. They're looking at all the various hazards, what the vulnerabilities and risks are associated with those hazards. They are looking at options to address this particular issue, and as Ryan was mentioning, prioritize their plans and then put those plans into action and understand where they're being successful and where they can make adjustments. So if we look at that pattern at the state level, the state of Colorado has a series of similar steps, but in this case, they're more focused on disaster resilience, which also incorporates local communities and that lends towards a partnership and collective guidance across the whole state. And if we zoom in even closer, the city of Boulder's steps for resilience get a lot more granular. And they're having taken specific tactics that work towards how resilience impacts guidance within the community planning. They're really incorporating it into how their city works to ensure long-term resilience. So while the specific steps vary across these different perspectives, they have a lot of overlap in their approach where they're all doing some sort of hazard and vulnerability assessment. They're looking at community impacts and where their programs are working well and where they can do some more, and then prioritizing their action plans as they move forward. Here's a specific look at the City of Boulder's action plan. They've broken this down into steps from the former slides into specific phases, challenge areas, and indications where they've begun to actually make some progress. Their goal is to incorporate resilience, as I mentioned, as a part of their everyday business. So as an example of this, we can see that the Boulder Office of Emergency Management has an initiative to incentivize the use of community planning strategies with local businesses, which falls under the Connect and Prepare strategy for preparing all segments of the community for uncertainty and disruption. So, pardon me. So they're really working to build that into their everyday approach. And next up, we have another poll question for you.
Excellent. So let's take a look at this one. So let's say, there are a number of ways that Jess is going to be discussing, as she kind of showed you, both as you get at the national level and then very granular at the city or county level. But in the process of that, there's also ways that you can start to use tools. And so we'd like to just maybe get a sense really quick for Jess, if you've started to conduct a risk assessment for your assets, and have you determined a resilience score, right? That's really the key part. So Jess is about to get into what resilience score means and help you plan. But to give us a bit of context before we go into the nitty gritty on determining resilience score, we'd like to just know a bit about where you are today. So yes, we've conducted a risk assessment for my assets to determine resilience score. No, we haven't. We're not sure. We don't even know what a resilience score mean is a valid answer as well. So give us just a second to kind of level set on your experience and some of the terminology here on resilience scores, and then we'll adjust from there. So if you would take a moment, select one, yes, no, we're not sure, what is a resilience score? So we'll give you a second to reply to the next poll. All right, let's take a look at the results. All right, good. So no, and then not sure. So we have about 41% that are not sure what a resilience score is. So just we can kind of set some context there as we kind of go another level down. And then 39% have not, 20% have. So that's great news to hear 20% of folks out there doing some work. So Jess, I'll turn it back to you and maybe we can pick up there and set some context on the resilience score as we get into the technical level.
Sure, sounds good.
Thanks.
All right, so yeah, so as Ryan mentioned, we're going to start to dig into the collection of solutions that we've released for resilience, and that includes some tools to help you with assessing your assets to understand their specific resilience, and then how we can use that information to understand the landscape of our community and use that in doing our plans. And then we'll also see some tools for engaging with the public and with our community stakeholders to understand, what the impacts are of specific types of events or stresses on them. And then also a tool to, communicate about the overall resilience programs that you may have in your communities. And just a note to some of the partners that we've been working with on these collections. So we've been working with the Colorado Office of Resiliency, the New York Department of State Coastal Resiliency Commission, as I've mentioned, the City of Boulder, and Fernleaf on understanding the requirements and needs for technology solutions in this area. All right, and so now we're ready to see some stuff. So let me exit our slideshow here. And we'll start with a tool to start assessing the assets in our community. And so what we're looking at here is Survey 123 for ArcGIS. And one of the solutions that we're providing is the Community Resilience Survey. And so we've got a survey here to help us assess the resiliency in several different categories of our critical infrastructure and key assets in the community. So I've got a couple different ways that I can work with this survey. I can send teams out maybe with a list of assets and then capture information about our assets from scratch. And so I'll give you a quick tour of this form. So the first section of the form gives us a place to identify the name of the asset, its address, its location, the type of asset that it is. And then we have collections of questions to start to get a sense for the resiliency of these particular assets. So one way that you might work with this form is to go out into the field and identify your assets. But another way you might work with this, and I'm just going to cancel out of this, is by you probably already know those key assets that exist in your organizations. And so you can actually pre-populate your data using the inbox feature. And so I'm just going to search for a collection of MedStar medical facilities, and then I want to answer questions about this particular hospital. So if I open this up, I can see some of this information in the form's already been populated for me. If I'm, on your teams going out into the field and working on this, it might be helpful to provide some of the information that you already know. So we can see that this is health and social services, it's a healthcare facility and its subcategory. And we have some information about its inherent resilience already, whether the asset's government owned or not. If we have information about repetitive loss that may apply, we can identify that in its development zone. And then we can start to answer additional questions, like does the asset serve vulnerable populations? And we can answer yes. Is it a critical facility? In this case, we might say no. The asset's overall community value might be high. It's maybe a key asset for that particular community. And if we have information about replacement value and the people that are served by and work at this asset, then we can also fill this in. So I've got a little bit of information here I can populate. We know that there's a small population that's served by this particular asset, and then we know the number of employees that work here. Okay, so that sort of gives us a sense for just some general information about this location. And we also have additional categories. So we want to understand, how does this asset rely on or potentially become a contributing factor in the electrical network? So does this asset rely on electricity? Yes. Does it have a backup generator? Yes. And here's a great question that helps us start to understand how this asset might affect other assets. Does the lack of electricity to this particular location, a hospital, affect other assets' electrical capability? So in this case, maybe it's a no. Is it a part of demand response program? Are there flood pumps that are reliant on electricity? No. And is it energy efficient? So one area of resilience is electricity, another is transportation. So is this particular asset reliant on road, shipping, rail, or air transportation networks? So perhaps it's reliant on road, but not rail. Yeah, shipping, we'll say no air. So these are just general inherent resiliency of the assets. And then we can have sections of questions that are more focused on a specific shock or stress. So here what we're looking at are a collection of questions around flooding. What's the risk of flooding in the area around this asset? Perhaps it's none, maybe it's at a higher elevation. Does the asset have inadequate or poorly maintained flood protection? It might be yes, because if it's at a low risk, or if we don't think risk is a factor. Below, say no. Lack buffer. So these collections of questions are based on the research that we've done and help us to understand the resilience of a particular asset to this type of a shock or stress. And what we anticipate is that you might be filling this out in partnership with the owner of the asset itself, and you might complete this for several assets in your community. And so once I'm done with the form, I'll click, and I can choose to send it now or later. So survey 123 is great if you're in an area that may have low connectivity to the internet. You can do these surveys offline and then send them when you're back. Send them in when you're in the office. In this case, I'll send it now. And now I can move on to the next asset, in my list for that day. So this is one way that you can start to capture information about the resilience of specific assets in your community. And once you've done that, you're likely to want to do some analysis. So what does that information mean? And with this Pro project, we can start to do that analysis. And the Pro project includes a task. And tasks are great because they help us to essentially write down and automate the standard operating procedures that we may have for specific types of workflows that we need to do in our organizations. And so around resilience, we've categorized the several types of things that you may need to do when you're gathering information about your specific assets and then analyzing them to understand what resiliency looks like for your assets overall. So creating summaries and rolling that information up. So this task includes some workflows to guide you through understanding what's delivered with the Pro project and just getting familiar with the data that's delivered. And then we've got workflows that help you to source and import your asset data. So if you're using a Survey 123 form like what we just saw, then you're capturing that data on the fly in the field. But you may already have some of this asset information in other formats, like other databases in your organization, or maybe even CSV files. So we wanted to provide you with tools to get that data into a GIS format that you can use for doing further analysis. And so that's what this collection of tasks is all about. If you are starting from scratch, then we've got some tools to help you add those questions into the data sets. And so all of these questions are based on the work that our team has done to establish a baseline configuration for these solutions, but they're totally extensible. So if you are interested in some other type of a shock, maybe flood isn't an issue in your area, but tornadoes are, then you might want to look more specifically at other types of events. You can add your own questions, and then we have some tools to help you with identifying the at risk. So let's just take a look at one of these as an example. So if we're looking at flood, then we might want to use some additional information to help us understand whether assets are at risk or not. So here, we're just going to zoom in to an area where we have some flood data. And here we're just looking at FEMA flood zone data. And what we can do is use the select by location. And the workflow is going to guide us through this task. So we can go to our map tab, do select by location. We can select assets that intersect our FEMA flood zones, which I think are going to be this one, and click run. And so what this will do is identify all those assets that fall within the flood zone, the FEMA flood zones, and then we can calculate that question where we were asked, are your assets in a flood zone or not? And so this step will guide us through actually performing that calculation. All right, so that's one way that we can use these tasks to use supplemental data to identify specific characteristics for our assets. And then we can also follow some workflows to populate additional resilience information. So if we're not in the field using that form, we can calculate those questions, the results of those questions also within this Pro project. In this case, we're looking at our data from Survey 123, so we've already got access to all the questions and answers that we saw in the previous configuration. The other thing that we're seeing here are resilience scores. So we've got some tools to help us calculate resilience scores. And what we're doing with this particular element is we're ranking the questions. So what we're giving a +1 for a yes or a -1 for a no answer, and then summarizing those for each category. So if we are looking here just at our transportation questions, we can see our transportation resilience score is a -2 when we add these all together. And we've got tools to help us do that. So if we walk into this, we can say we want to calculate our flood resilience score for all of our assets. And this tool will execute, evaluate the questions that we've answered, and then give us a score on all of our assets. And we've got tools to help us do this for each category of resilience, for the electricity, transportation, and ultimately a total resilience score. And so we can see that finished and adding our resilience to our resilience score fields and then calculating the values for us. All right, and so if we move on, this is going to guide us through doing that resilience score for each category. And then the next thing we want to look at is summarizing resilience within the boundaries. So whatever jurisdictional boundaries are important for your community, you can choose that. In this case, what we've done is we've summarized this for counties within the state. Pardon me. So I've pre-calced the analysis for us just to help us get going with this. So if we look at the analysis within each county, we can see that pop up where we have more assets or less assets based on just the color here. We can also look at the resilience score itself. Pardon me. So we see our total resilience here. We're looking at it with the standard deviation to understand comparatively where we have higher or lower resilience. We can also look at just the basic summary of the resilience. Pardon. So here we can see a summary of the total resilience score, and then it's displayed so we see where we have areas of lower total resilience or higher total resilience. Okay, so once we complete our analysis, we want to share that with our communities and stakeholders helping us to improve resilience for our communities. And so one way that we can do that is through a dashboard. So here we can see that same data that we were just looking at in Pro, but in a dashboard view. And so right away I can see areas with higher total resilience in green and lower total resilience in red. Pardon me, this data is also, you can explore it. It's a live map. So as we click on the map, we can understand what county it is, what the resilience score is, what those subcategories of resilience look like. The dashboard also gives us some tools to look more closely at specific categories of assets. So right away in this chart, we can see where we have the proportion of assets in different types of flood zones. So where we have a high incidence of flooding or moderate incidence of flooding. We can also query the assets, like if we want to specifically look for housing that's critical for FEMA, then we can query this and then see it on the map. Looks like we have one here. And then if we look specifically at the aggregations, we have tools to help us find those jurisdictions with higher average resilience. This query is also taking into account the count of assets there. So we might seem to have like a lower average resilience score, but we want to look at locations that also have a lot of resources to support our populations. Okay, so that's the dashboard. So once you have the information, oops, pardon me.
Jess, thanks for stepping in. I know you're fighting a cold, so
I know,
if you
I'm
want to
so
take a
sorry, you guys.
I know you're doing a great job, so I appreciate. You want to take a quick break? And I'll we've got a couple of questions that have popped in, and I can certainly give you a break for a drink of water.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So there were a couple of questions that came in. I'll just kind of answer a few of those that had been asked earlier. So there was one question about, solutions that they work with ArcGIS Pro, and I think you're seeing how those solutions are working inside of ArcGIS Pro today. So for those of you that are migrating your desktop application from ArcMap into ArcGIS Pro, you'll see that there. And then one of the great tools I think that exists now for ArcGIS Pro is the solution deployment tool. So, Jess can dive into more of that detail as we go through, but you have the ability, not just for the resilience solutions that we're talking today, but for any of the other solutions that support emergency management or support your other work, public works and the like, you can use that add-in inside of ArcGIS Pro to query and find the solution of choice, then to quickly deploy that solution, which will then populate feature services, applications, and the like, symbology. So it's a great way to get started very quickly. And so we can certainly talk more if you've got questions, anyone about ArcGIS Pro integration. And then the other side was that there was a question a bit about, can we use some of this in other ways? So there's a lot of data I think that people are using both as they do risk assessments in the community, pre-incident plans around venues and the like. So know that the data we're talking here, I mean, those things are complementary. And as Jess said, you can certainly preload some of the asset data that you've got and bring that other risk assessment data that you may have done around facilities or venues to the table to kind of inform that resilience score. And then collectively, those two together give you a nice way to move back and forth between your exercise side of the house and your implementation programmatic side of the house as well. So we can certainly talk more there as we go through. So Jess, hopefully that gave you a little bit of time to thanks again. I know you're doing a good job today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for the water break.
Sure thing.
Yes, exactly. So as Ryan mentioned, the deployment tool that's available in Pro will help you deploy the resilience dashboard we looked at, the asset surveys, all with a single click of the button. And when I get done, just before I turn it back over to Ryan again, I'll show you where you can find all of these configurations online and start using them for your organizations. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk with you about today is just a way that you can engage your citizens to understand how they're being affected by specific shocks or stress, and then also start to gauge how your programs are improving the resilience of your communities. And one tool that you might use is community impacts. This is a configuration of the crowdsourced reporter configurable application template. And this is a tool that you can use to just take a quick pulse on how your communities are doing, maybe after a specific type of event has happened. And so what we're looking at is just the list of the responses that have been submitted so far, so we can look in here and see whether how this person reacted to a specific type of an incident. So looks like in this case, the school access to school was affected. They had to go a longer route to get to school that day. And we can see what function was impacted as a result of this impact, and if it had a positive or negative, how long were they affected by this particular occurrence. And when someone comes in to submit a new report, this is the form that they see. I've got an example here. So maybe this particular person submitted was evacuated, and there were facilities for them to go to, and they wanted to report that they appreciated that the facility was there, and it affected their sense of belonging with the community. It actually had a positive effect. They were impacted in this event, and this positive effect lasted for weeks. And then they can click on the map to show where this particular impact or effect took place, and then click report it. And so for an organization, a resilience organization or emergency management organization monitoring this feedback, we have another dashboard. So here we can see responses for incidents and also like their service impact. If we want to take a look at a specific cluster, maybe here we want to see this cluster of reports, we can select them and get more information about these specific reports in the dashboard itself. We also have some views to break down the feedback to look at the specific function that that feedback is for, the duration that they were impacted by specific things, and the overall impression of positive or negative. So again, we can use a tool like this to help us understand how our programs are, how the effect of the programs that we're putting into place have on our communities. Are we overall improving the resilience and the capability of our communities with the things that we're putting into place? And the last thing we wanted to show you today was a community outreach tool. So here we've got a story map journal that you might use as you're determining your strategies for your communities and implementing new practices to help improve resilience. You're definitely going to want to share that with the community and like stakeholders at all levels so they can know what you're working on for them, and then they can also become active participants. So with resilience outreach, you can provide both the context and the information for your resilience initiatives with the public. So we'll just step through this. The first thing that you might want to communicate about is the information that you're using to gauge resilience of your community. So here we can see, we can break down our assets by infrastructure. We can show where our health and social services assets are. So we can communicate like how we're evaluating overall resilience. We can also share how the methodologies that we're using to aggregate and understand where we have low areas of resilience or higher areas of resilience. And providing these maps to our citizens just helps them understand, again, what's around them, what the resources are available, and how they might be able to contribute. And another way that you might communicate is just walk them through the types of analysis that you're doing. So if you're looking specifically at a flood type hazard, then the interactive nature of the story maps makes it really interesting to walk through a scenario. Like if you're in a flood zone, you want to understand where the assets are in that flood zone, similar to what we were doing in Pro, and look at a specific type of flooding event to help business owners or community organizers help to contribute to the work that you're doing. Okay, so then where can you find all of this work? It's going to be found on solutions.arcgis.com under the emergency management category. So if you just scroll over this block, you'll see the resilience collection here. And here's where that collection can be found. So I'll just want to drop into one specifically. So here you can download sample data. We also give you instructions on getting started. So helping you to get started using these configurations, we'll give you step-by-step instructions on how to use them. If we take a look at the surveys, we can see the deploy option that Ryan mentioned. So again, we'll help you get started installing that Pro add-in, and then give you a list of everything that's going to be created in your organization if you're to use this method. Okay, so I just wanted to give you guys another quick overview of the whole collection of resilience solutions. So today we looked at community resilience tools to assess your assets and then analyze that to get an understanding of the whole layout of your community. Tools for understanding the impacts. We also have configurations to help with hazard analysis and vulnerability assessments. Those are also Pro projects that will guide you through the analysis to begin to understand those aspects. And then just a quick view of the roadmap. So we were working to bring that analysis workflow into a web-based configuration, so it's a little bit easier to access it. We've also been exploring the use of 3D, so being able just to get a different perspective on these different types of events and how they might impact your communities just in that different view. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ryan.
Great, thanks, Jess.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So as Jess said, there's a good roadmap in front of us in terms of solution templates for resilience, and there are a couple of next steps I think that would be helpful for those of you that are really looking to implement this moving forward. So Jess gave you the website tour of the solutions site. So there is a direct link here on the slide. go.esri.com/resilience-wn. I'll take you directly there. So once you get the email after this, you'll have links to that solution offering as well, where you can certainly dig in behind the scenes on how to deploy other options that are available, as Jess mentioned. And then coming up at our Esri user conference this July, so as you start to take this journey, it's March now, July is not that far away. So for those of you that are going to join us, we will be talking resilience in both the public safety neighborhood, where we have presentations and we'll show you a bit more in detail about how to do some of these things. Jess and the solutions team will be there. We have an island that you can certainly circle up and dig into more detail about a specific solution, or even provide feedback, which is also just as invaluable. As Jess said, we truly appreciate the feedback from the community to make these as usable as possible. So know you can meet the team there. We also have multiple public safety technical sessions. So at another level down than just kind of the intro to these solutions, we'll actually be talking at length about how to implement, how to deploy, how to actually put these into practice, and some tips and tricks that you might find useful. And so there are a number of those technical sessions, not just resilience, but across the emergency management spectrum that you might find really useful. And of course, leaving today, questions and idea, any suggestions, you can email myself at rlandcloss@esri.com or Jess as well at jnooner@esri.com. So before we break away, I do want to take a minute to say heads up for our next webinar, Thursday, May 3rd, 2018. You can join us again. You'll get an invitation. So I'd love to have you back on the next webinar, and you'll get information about that one coming soon. But I do want to take a moment there were a couple of questions broadly I think that would be well, Jess, if you don't mind, I'll throw a couple to you. So one of the questions we had specifically was, can I implement this in my own environment, or do I just have to use ArcGIS Align? I think there's a mix of folks that are using ArcGIS Enterprise and Portal inside of their own firewall, and maybe ArcGIS Online as well. So maybe talk to that just a second about implementation of some of these solutions.
Sure. So that's a really great question. And all the solutions are designed to work both in ArcGIS Online and in your on-prem deployment. So if you're at an organization that has your own portal or your own ArcGIS servers that you'd like to use, then that's totally an option. And we work to make sure that everything works in both configurations.
Excellent. Thanks, Jess. And then there were a couple of questions, I think, which may be something we can share afterward if we can't get into the details of it today, but specifically around the metrics that were used to define the community resilience. So some of the methodologies into the scoring of the assets. So maybe you could speak as a high level there. If there's something maybe we could share after today that would be useful as well, just to bring that up, because there's a couple of questions about that.
Sure.
That asked.
Sure. So the way that the scoring works is a straightforward like +1, -1 based on the way that the questions are answered. And we were able to sort of dive deep on the survey, but actually all of the calculations are included in the survey also, so that scoring is happening real time. We've also got an aspect for percent of questions answered. So we want to know if we don't have complete information for a particular asset, that score should maybe be discounted based on the amount of information we have. And so we have some methodologies to take that into consideration also. But one thing that's worth mentioning is everything that we have implemented is considered open source. So you get all of the details about how the scoring's been implemented is delivered to you. And so if you need to adjust it because you want to make one question more influential over the overall score, then you would be able to adjust that through a Python script.
Excellent. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jess. And then I think the last thing you kind of just hit on there a bit, which is just the ability to modify this. And I know you demonstrated the ability there, but maybe just speak one last time. And, in the Survey 123 tool, it is configurable, and just maybe speak to that level a bit again would be useful as we close out.
Yeah, so it's worth mentioning that we'll be working to expand the collection of shocks and stresses that we have question sets for. But you can also add to or modify the questions that are part of the solution. And so one way to do that would be through the Survey 123 form. You could also do that manually by just simply through some data management through the schema, and then through that script for calculating the score, adjusting that. So does that answer the question, Ryan?
Yeah, sure did. Thanks, Jess.
Okay.
And I think just the last thing, I think, part of this uniqueness of this ability to not just modify the questions in advance, but the last kind of question, how soon are things updated, but using Survey 123 in the field and doing those kind of asset inspections and kind of really answering the question on the fly. I mean, as soon as those things are submitted, right, they're showing back up into the maps and the dashboards and the like. So you are getting kind of a near real-time look at how things are evolving based on your field crew's ability to canvas the area to complete those surveys. And as Jess said, some of the indicators within that also give you the ability to kind of say we need to maybe hit the brakes and go back because we've missed something, or there's an area of town that we haven't completed either the assets or just the completion of the asset inventory as well. So yeah, those are great opportunities, I think, for the mobile device and for those that work in the office, using ArcGIS Pro to be able to do those things as well. So you may have some existing data, and I love that Jess kind of articulated, bring the assets and the work that you've done before into this system to then kind of exploit the scoring and the relevancy around that for resilience. So just good things. So if you have questions for us beyond today, I know we're at the end of our hour, do reach out to us at the emails provided. Feel free to chat in the window one last time, and there is an opportunity at the end to ask somebody to contact you, and Jess or myself will get in touch with you after that, or somebody from our teams will do that. So if you have specific questions you'd like to dig a little bit deeper today, certainly let us know that, and we will follow up after the webinar. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thanks to Jess for joining us and being a trooper. Appreciate it. Great job, Jess. Thanks to all of you for joining us today on the webinar series, and we look forward to seeing you at our next one in May. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.